Good afternoon, everyone. China Agriculture, and here Ink Girl, live streaming herself, screaming, oppose Xi Jinping's authoritarian tyranny, live, throwing ink on a poster. Not more than 8 hours later, security forces are at her door. Her Twitter has been removed. The Chinese government quickly put out a mandate, remove all the political posters of the CCP leaders so nobody can deface them. And now it seems the ink has turned to the buildings, but this is the Beijing Municipal High People's Court. There's definitely a movement in the country. He's not my president. And the inkings seem to continue and amplify. It has turned her into a mythical hero fighting a dragon. But when we look at Chinese crop losses, what's going to happen when this entire generation of disgruntled youth has their food prices double or triple? And we can forecast out water cycles or rainfall cycles in China, Central East China going to become drier over the next 20 years, South China as well, North China as well. You can see the monsoon is moved by sunspot activity. We can see where the drought periods were during China, another drought on the way. And if we're talking about cosmic cycles, once in a 2,000-year event, at the bare minimum, Dalton minimum is the blue. Early 1800s, we're at the red. Solar activity is forecast to decline from this point forward. This will have pronounced effects on global crop production. And mix in another layer of the soy and the sorghum tariff war going on, China grabbing Brazil's production of soya, Argentine soybeans plummet, American wheat down, and global total grains forecast to be down 40 million tons next year. We got these World Trade Organization challenges against 5 nations. Looking at the interwoven pattern of just-in-time delivery. Hey, what could go wrong with that? Ink Girl has definitely started some movement inside China. And if all the students in this generation were to start protesting the government because of high food prices, you would just expect that things would not be delivered due to the chaos within that country. Disruption in shipping is a perfect way to mask the grand solar minimum. Now, if you have a breakdown in your supply chain, do you have any seeds where you could sprout or start to grow for food? TrueLeafMarket.com, microgreens and sprouts. Have fun growing indoor and hand-raising some nutritious food. Forecast here you of amplification and intensification in the weather that's going to continue to cause stresses in crop production. We're already seeing losses globally at the moment, everything from fruit to berries, to grapes, corn, wheat, everything is being affected across all continents. Not an entire continental wipeout, but things are definitely showing signs of damage from extreme weather on the cold end, heat, ferocious winds from the mixing patterns as the magnetosphere weakens and our jet streams go out of flow. This is the timeline, and it's really interesting how the amplification in the news is following this. Also, Jim Rogers calling for a crash later this year or next. Bubbles is what he's calling it. And he references Chinese had a lot of money saved for a rainy day. It started raining. And something else in a disruptive force here, shipping, world's largest shipping company, Maersk, collapsing. So when you take a look at the just-in-time delivery system around our planet, China is woven into this so deeply along with the United States. Europe, everything is intertwined. It includes banking and the shipping, the fuel, the letters of credit. All of this has to continue to function. Now, if there's reductions in crops somewhere along the way, they're going to try to pick it up elsewhere. Point in case, China over in Brazil buying what, 53% of their harvest this year. Is this tariff on soy and sorghum coming out of the U.S.? Where are they going to get all that additional soybean meal to feed pigs, poultry? And because of late season blizzards this year, U.S. wheat supply expected down 3%, but the carryover wheat stocks down 10%. Argentina soybean plummets 7 million tons. And when you think about shifting grow zones, just like China will have to consider this as North America, even a 1 degree temperature drop will have to reduce agriculture to within that dark black line from where it's grown outside in the periphery areas. And when I say 1 degree Celsius, That's the blue line in the back, solar cycles 3 through solar cycle 6. The red line is us, where we are currently with our solar activity, and solar cycle 24 still trying to taper out, but it is expected over these next 2 solar cycles that our sun is going into a grand solar minimum, bringing us back to the Dalton minimum. Now, there were losses in crops that were documented well back then. 1 degree Celsius drop means northern China, Liu-Jiang, and that whole area up there to grow wheat offline. Central area, Henan, corn up there as well as central, going to have a more difficult time growing. You can map these cycles back and point out exactly where the droughts are going to come, whether you're entering into the grand solar minimum or whether you're exiting. Now, these are the reconstructed historical droughts going into the Maunder minimum and also exiting the Maunder minimum. In the bottom right there, you can see late 1800s. That's after the Dalton minimum finished, but you can see where the driest areas occur when we get these intertropical convergence zones moving their moisture patterns. Now, I'm throwing in the wild card here because definitely something has flipped and changed in just the undercurrent of the society in this girl's generation. You would have never expected. I was shocked when I saw this. I was just, that is impossible. Somebody just did this live on Twitter. With ink, no less. Now, ink is very important. You have to go back to the Cultural Revolution to understand the significance of ink. Pouring ink on the educated teachers, on the persons with opinions, on the university professors, and embarrassed them publicly. They used ink and poured it on their heads. Here she live streams when she walks up to the picture of Xi Jinping on a signboard on the street side and starts saying, oppose Xi Jinping's authoritarian tyranny. It goes on to say, we have no free speech. She points to the building behind her and says, I live here, come and get me. I know I'm waiting for you to come and get me. Within 8 hours, security forces are at her door. She gets dressed, heads off with them. Nobody's seen her since. Her Twitter feed's been closed down, and the only way to access videos are on other websites. I put the links below so you can see the live video of her, what she's talking about, and what she did as a defiant move. And that one single act turned her into a mythical fighter against the dragon. And since that time, the inkings have become, well, let's say common, and so many and so unexpected in many places across the country that the Communist Party put out directives to remove all images of Xi and all party officials, and they wanted to replace it with social core values. Now, since they took down the posters immediately, within 24 hours, people started targeting buildings. I thought that might be the case too, but on the Beijing Municipal High People's Court, because when you start to see printed material, he's not my president, that would have gotten you thrown in jail for 20 years and hard labor. Now these images are coming out as well, these characters and memes. I don't know, but in my opinion, I think the ink girl has absolutely started an awakening inside that country of we need to stand up now because the harsh changes that are here that are suppressing and limiting any types of online discussions or any thoughts. Those of you in the United States who want to have alternative opinions diminished, channels removed, social media deleted because you would disagree with their ideas, you just saw what happens. BuzzFeed has an incredible rundown on this, all compiled in one place. Now, with all that politics aside over there, we'll put that as set A. Now I want to mix in set B so you can see how they're connected. I've been talking all along, when we come into this more prolonged sunspotless activity, our crops are going to be affected. We're going to repeat something. This is the Dalton minimum or the Maunder minimum, where global temperatures drop and our yields decrease. Well, if the yields are decreasing and China needs ever more food, and some countries are going offline, such as United States, Canada, parts of Europe, Russia, and China going offline, producing some of its food in the Northeast, we just have to start to look back at cycles and see how much food, how many grains, what types of grains will be lost. I'm pegging it at something around a once in a 2,000 year event based on this planetary geometry of when we swing into the more heavier amplification and the cooler point of the grand solar minimum. But that's one thing, that's just a global event. Now you can bring it down a step where you can find regional areas and you can map those out with solar activity and how the monsoon or the intertropical convergence zone is moved north or south based on pressure systems in the upper atmosphere. So I'll draw your attention to this chart here. That very light gray is the intensity of the solar cycle. So the more sunspots there were, the taller that would be. And that black line smooth through the center is East Asian Meiyu, which means rainy season. Where it moved north latitude, how far? You can see there's at least a 1.5 degree shift there. 100 miles or so, maybe a little more. But coming into lower solar activity, down into grand solar minimum, where is this going to bring the monsoon to be able to push further north at its maximum? So looking at the interdecadal variation of the summer precipitation in East China, this is associated directly with that Asian summer monsoon. This has been mapped out since the 1870s. It's in a pattern as well. So the forecast is quite clear. Central East China, that's going to become drier. South China, drought as well. North China, coming into a dry period. Lower Yangtze is absolutely being inundated with floods. This extra water that they're getting up, it's not steady rainfall, it's gargantuan once in a 200-year floods, etc. Looking overall within the atmosphere, these are the blocking patterns and how these flows in the sky change and also change the rainfall. Looking at something black and white with the positive and negative, why don't we look here with some color and you can see the correlation in the sunspot numbers in May, June for the absolute rainiest season. This goes back to 1901. Now look at the difference in the rainfall comparatively to what the sunspot is. So what we're looking for is decreased sunspot activity to map this out, not increasing. So then you'll start to think, all right, there's going to be a drought over in this area. They've done an enormous amount of research in the areas that have the red box there. And they find out of the entire year's season, the rainy season is the most affected by the sunspot and solar activity output. So all you have to do is look back in time and say, all right, where were the sunspots then? Were we in a grand solar minimum? What type of solar activity was there at that time? And look out to see where the droughts are or where it became wetter and cooler. Here's 4 different time charts for you. Top, Maunder minimum, 1638, 1641. That's approximately the beginning of the quoted Maunder minimum. And they exited out approximately 1710. And you notice that dark brown up there, that is Liu-Jiang. That is where they grow an enormous amount of wheat in China. Now coming out of the grand solar minimum, it looks like that area got more water, but India and Southeast Asia started to dry. Now what's also interesting, the bottom left, when we're coming into the Dalton minimum, that comes up to 1796, but the Dalton minimum pretty much has a start date around 1810, maybe about 15 years, 10 or 15 years after that. So what do we see again? Incredibly more drought than during the Maunder minimum. So you can expect these areas to have a very, very difficult time starting to grow crops due to reduced rainfall and also colder temperatures. So that would be set B of information. Now let's add in the final set C. And once you mix these 3 together, you can see it's very apparent what's going on with the news feed and how governments are going to start to react to control the citizens when food prices rise. Let's take a look at elsewhere where wheat is being grown that's going offline. South Africa, they're a major producer and exporter up to the rest of Africa. So if Africa buyers are drawing from somewhere else because they can't get it from South Africa, they're going to pull from somebody else's stock. But China's going to be trying to pull from somebody else's stock as well. These areas across North America and even over in Nova Scotia, which I didn't circle at some late season freezes, these 3 areas are showing extreme stress. And you'll understand why the U.S. wheat crop is down in that central Nebraska area. Areas here in Australia also losing wheat production. France is losing everything. Vineyards, berries, wheat. It is just a nonstop flood and weather event happening over there and Germany as well. So these 2 producers in Europe showing signs of decreased yield. And that takes us right into this interwoven just-in-time delivery system that all revolves on credit first, and then things move after because there's a guarantee of payment. But historically, a country's harvest is its true GDP, because without the food, everything else ceases. Now, how many breaks could there be in this just-in-time delivery system? I mean, this is the global food system alone. This is not electronics. This is just your food source. And think about itself. Just a post-harvest supply chain has to go through this many hands to go from the farmers to the distributors. And then once it's to the distributors, it needs to get moved by shipping companies. Back to that other slide. There's so many things going on now. We got these World Trade Organization challenges against 5 different nations launched by the U.S. U.S. wheat production is expected down 2%. But the world wheat consumption at a record up 1.6%. And then you jump over to inconvenient statistics like this. Total grains forecast by the United States Department of Agriculture going to drop 40 million tons in the carryover stocks of the top entry there, total grains. So if they're already forecasting out decreases and into the carryover, so somebody pulled 40 million tons out, where's that going to take us over the next 3, 4, 5 years as China continues to go offline and all these other countries as well? It's going to be a lot of people seeking out food sources or substitution crops. And then you see China with 179% tariff on sorghum. I just don't get it why China is doing this with the sorghum play when they need this for their animals. And then I want to wind this back into Ink Girl again. This is a greater movement inside the society. Her generation has a lot of problems to contend with, trying to find jobs. Housing's too expensive. The job market's completely saturated. Everybody's continually going to school just because they can't find jobs. You got people with PhDs that can't find work, millions and millions of people with master's degree that can't find work. Things are becoming quite unaffordable. And now you're going to throw in doubling or tripling food prices. And this is why I see something that's going to connect with the grand solar minimum. These people are going to take action when their food prices rise. In case in point, I had one of my viewers here send me these images and said, David, I want to remain anonymous. Because in China, you're not allowed to report on the news. So if you blog about weather events, that's illegal now. So this is July 1st, Sanchahu. And then July 2nd in Liu-Jiang. These are floods that destroyed Liu-Jiang Old Town and unreported on within the greater Chinese media. And just think how all these events are intertwining right now with the timeline of the grand solar minimum. Thanks for watching. Hope you got something out of the video. Again, I'm trying to post up a written form of this with all the text and with all the images on my Steam channel, Adapt2030, steemit.com/Adapt2030. And if you have any ideas or thoughts on how the layout is, either through Medium or Steemit, please send me a message. I'm looking on how to present the most value in that written form because I know some people like to read versus watch the video.